Thanks very much, James. Hello, everybody. I'm really delighted to be joining you for this session of our Cambridge Schools Conference. I'm Abby Barnett. I'm Deputy Director of Curriculum Programmes for Cambridge International. I think James may have said that this session was for maths and science. So actually, this is the session for primary and lower secondary. So I hope that's what you thought you were signing up for. One of my roles in Cambridge is that I've got overall responsibility for the Cambridge primary and lower secondary curriculum. That part of the Cambridge pathway, which is for our youngest Cambridge learners. And that's an area that if you teach Cambridge primary and lower secondary, you'll know we've made some exciting changes in the last couple of years, adding some more subjects and revising our core subjects for English, E2L, maths and science. What we didn't anticipate, of course, is the global pandemic that's continuing to affect all of us over a year on since the first cases of COVID were detected. And I think as educators, we are very used to the idea of changes and adapting to changes, but the situation we found ourselves in throughout 2020 and 2021 has certainly given us unprecedented challenges and changes to face. And one of the ways in which we're looking to support you here at Cambridge is through putting together these opportunities to come together and to share ideas and ways which have really helped us moving to a situation where a lot of us have been working in an online environment rather than in the face-to-face environment we're usually used to. So it's a great opportunity to come together. It's really interesting to see where you're all joining from this session. We're spread over many countries as usual with Cambridge events. And I'm really excited to bring to you my fellow colleagues on our panel. I'll introduce them. Before I do so, though, I hope that a lot of you were able to access the keynote presentation from Dr. Rhonda Bondi and her Q&A session, which set up a lot of ideas which we'll explore a bit further in this session. I thought that she had a great way of reframing our thoughts about being in an online environment, seeing that very positively. And for me, very reassuring in terms of reminding us that a lot of the great skills that you have as classroom teachers are ones that you can adapt really successfully in the online environment. And I think that was really, really good to hear about, with some very clear practical examples about how you do that. And as I say, that's something we want to build on in the session today. One of the things that she talked about was at the beginning of a session, it's a really great idea to check in with everybody and see where they are, what their thoughts are about a topic, what they know already. So we're going to use that to start off, to kick off our session right now. Can I have the next slide up, please, James? Okay, so what we'd like you to do is to answer this question that's here on the screen. In your opinion, what words or phrases sum up good practice in remote teaching and learning? So you can click on the link there. It's also in the chat, and use the code there, and you'll be able to answer that question, and we'll see developing the most common words or phrases that are used to answer that question. So I'll give you all a couple of minutes to do that before we have a look at the results. Okay, so I think we can have a look now at your answers. And this will continue to change as we have more responses coming in, so do keep them coming. I can't really see a clear favourite at the moment. When you have lots of similar answers, it comes up as bigger text. So we've got quite a lot of different responses that have had equal numbers of contributions. Here we go. Okay, it looks like it's settling now. Right, so we can see there that we've definitely got some themes emerging. You're definitely emphasising that engaging is really important in terms of good practice. Also, interaction and creativity and collaboration are coming out strongly as well, with lots of other ideas around there. But yeah, it's definitely engaging, isn't it? That's come out as the most popular answer there, and that definitely you'll hear that theme featured as we hear from our other speakers in the session this afternoon. So thank you very much for your contributions there. That's great. Okay, can we have the next slide, please? Thanks, James. So first of all, I'm going to hand over to Rosie. Rosie Nelson's an education manager in our teaching and learning division here. She has a background in primary and early years education. She's taught in Australia and in the UK. So she brings that great classroom experience to her role, where she's been working on some projects exploring play-based learning and active learning for primary students, working in the teaching and learning division here at Cambridge. So handing over to you. Thanks very much, Rosie.
Hi everybody, as Abby mentioned, I'm Rosie. I work in the teaching and learning team, and as a result of my experience working both in Australia and in the UK, I've been so fortunate to meet a large number of teachers from around the world, and over the course of the last year I've had a lot of conversations with those people about their experiences of teaching in the pandemic remotely. And some of the ideas I'll share with you today are based on those conversations, so I hope that they're useful. Next slide, please, James. So we've heard a lot about engagement for remote learning, and that came through quite clearly as one of the main themes in your Mentimeter just now. And it's not surprising that engagement is so important in this context, because it's a little bit more challenging to engage our learners when they're learning remotely. In our classrooms, we've got a lot more control over the physical environment and resources, and we can minimize distractions for our learners. But at home, we're contending with things like electronic devices or brothers and sisters, a lot of things that are much more interesting than doing schoolwork. And it has to be said that learners are just not used to thinking hard at home. It's a place where they go to relax, not to think. So how do we overcome these challenges? Well, what we know is that engagement and motivation go hand in hand. And we also know that students demonstrate high levels of engagement when they're playing. So why not build opportunities for playful learning remotely? You're probably already using play in your planning for classroom teaching, using things like games or role play or inquiry learning. And these things are fantastic, but how do we do them remotely when we haven't got control of resources or the level of support that parents can offer to their learners? So here are some of the top tips that I've gathered through my conversations with colleagues. If you're going to use play-based learning remotely, make your learning goal clear and let learners know the type of thinking you want them to do while they're playing. Keep activities open-ended and plan for learners to do playful learning off-screen. Plan for activities that don't require specific resources. For example, you might have the learning goal of investigating properties of different materials. Plan for an off-screen, open-ended question to be explored by your learners, like, how do I create the best tower? Or perhaps they go off on scavenger hunts to collect different items depending on certain criteria, items that are sharp, items that make you feel happy, etc. By keeping activities open-ended in playful learning, we can reveal unique ways of thinking. But how do we check that learners are actually learning something? This is where reflection is really vital. Whenever you're planning for playful learning remotely, also plan for opportunities for learners to talk about what they did and what they were thinking while they were doing it. Dr. Bondi mentioned perhaps creating a slideshow over a series of lessons where learners collate pictures or videos of what they've done. By offering learners opportunities to do playful learning remotely, we can help them to feel autonomous and competent. In play, they are the experts. And then they can tap into their own interests and be physically active as well. And all of these things promote engagement. And not only that, playful learning gives learners the opportunity to work socially. If learners feel socially connected, they feel like they belong. And we know that when learners are socializing, they're also using language. And language is essential for learning. So when we're facilitating social interactions online, like even if they're talking about their favorite TV shows, learners are still engaging their brains. So you could, for example, offer an activity where learners engage in buddy calls, where they call each other and play out loud. And what I mean by this is they take turns to commentate what they're doing while they're playing, or they give instructions to each other about play. By doing this, they're engaging in active listening, questioning, reasoning, and they feel connected, which is really important for their mental health. So, and next slide, please, James. We've talked a lot about how we can engage learners, but we also need to think about what we can do for ourselves as teachers and what we can do to support parents in this remote learning environment. Remote learning is quite a significant change for us, and it has a huge impact on our mental health. In remote learning, the roles of parent and teacher become quite blurred. Who is the expert when it comes to the learner? Is it their parent or is it their teacher? Or is it a bit of both? It's really important that parents and teachers both feel valued and important. And our learners need to be at our very best so that we can support them. And Dr. Bondi reminded us that we need to understand learners' starting points, and that means understanding their learning environments and the people supporting them. So how can we establish and maintain positive relationships with parents? Many of my colleagues suggested that it's really important to mutually agree with parents how and when you'll communicate with them. And when you do communicate with them, don't just talk about the learners, but also talk about your own well-being. This way you can find some common ground and mutual respect. Parents also fed back that they found it really valuable to be given time to prepare for learning activities, to gather resources, to familiarize themselves with online learning platforms. By giving parents activities in advance, we can communicate with them about intended learning objectives. And this way, everybody knows what they're doing and why they're doing it. And it's also really valuable to think about how parents can feed back to you on what's working and what's not, and to share those wow moments with you, the moments when learners learn something new, those moments that boost you up as a teacher and keep you motivated. So through this, we can see that joining forces with parents can really help us to work together to support learners. And when our learners see us working together and the adults in their lives collaborating, they're going to feel even more supported and possibly even more motivated. And if we can motivate our learners, they're going to be confident, innovative, reflective, responsible learners, all of the Cambridge attributes. I hope some of these ideas have been helpful to you, and I'm sure you're already implementing quite a few of them. That's all from me at the moment. I'll hand you back to Abby now, who will introduce our next speaker. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rosie. It's great to hear you share your ideas there and also talk about the importance of that partnership that we can try and forge with parents to support our learners. So we're now going to move on to our next speaker. I'd like to introduce Judith Amery to the group. Judith has more than 30 years experience as a teacher and head teacher, and now as an educational consultant. She's one of our lead trainers for Cambridge International, so you may have met Judith already if you've attended some Cambridge training somewhere in the world. She also examines and assesses our professional development qualification and is an author and series editor for Primary Science. So I'm delighted to introduce Judith to share some tips and ideas with us. Over to you, Judith.
Hi everyone, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. As Abby said, my name is Judith Amery and I am a lead trainer, so I have a wealth of experience as being a privileged part of the Cambridge trainer team, but also from my own experiences as a head and an education consultant. So I want to continue this afternoon in this session to just share with you a couple of top tips that I have learned through working online throughout the past 12 months and from teachers and colleagues and friends and relatives, things that are making a difference to them quite significantly. So I think my first top tip is that any time that you spend creating a welcoming, participative environment is certainly not wasted, especially with younger learners, because you need to almost invite them into a classroom situation, even though it's virtual. So what I would say would try to, as Rosie was saying with planning, if the parents are informed or there's some forewarning, you can work around your planning so everybody can arrive in the session able to contribute. And what I mean like that is you can use the physical world as much as you can. And a couple of examples that you might use for that hook to draw them in are things like ask them to bring an object which begins with their initial letter of their name, or if you're teaching phonics, an object that begins with the letter or sound that you're going to be teaching that week. Sometimes at the beginning, to have sort of a welcome to the whole group, you could ask something a little less formal, something like bring a hat that's not actually a hat. So you can see I've got my puppet here that is a tortoise, but if I appeared at the start of a session with this on my head, it would get people thinking, why has she got that on her head? And it might come in useful later in the session. So what you want to create is the sense of, what are we going to be learning in this session? What is it about? What can I contribute? And that feeling of participation is where the strongest feelings of engagement come from. So my second top tip, before I give you a specific example, is in presentations and slides, I found it better to reduce the amount of text and have only maybe 1 or 2 sentences on a slide, so you can move the slides not too quickly but more quickly, and that seems to give a sense of pace to your sessions. And one thing that I often prefer to do is not have any words at all, just use the slides as a talking point for me to speak around with lots of pictures. So can I ask for the next slide, please, James? And here is my example. You might already be familiar with this activity called pose, pause, pounce, bounce, or you may use it but call it something else. But I'd just like to take a little bit of time to explain how this is something that you could use regularly face-to-face in the classroom, but even online it has possibilities and potential. So the very first thing you need to do is to think of the question that you are going to pose. So for example, my question might be, what is in the box? And it begins with the first letter of my name, J. That could be as much information as you need to give them. So that's the question. I would perhaps put that question on a PowerPoint slide so they've got it to read and they've also heard it from you. So once you have given the question, that is step one. But then probably the most important point is step two, which is pause, where you stop. And the reason for that is that you need to give them thinking time. And research shows that, particularly in maths lessons, if you fire out a rapid question, what is a half of 50? What is 30 divided by 6? What's 1 million divided by 8? If you ask it quickly, the intended response seems to be a rapid fire back response where it's not well thought out. So as a teacher, when you've asked your question, the most tricky thing for lots of teachers is to be quiet. But if you can mentally count to 10 in your head, then that gives some thinking time before you need to elicit responses from them. So this is what the expectation is, that at the end of that thinking time, at the end of the pause, then you are going to choose someone and they don't know who it might be. You could choose a random name generator. You could look at the participant list and choose someone randomly. You could do the class register. Any number of ways that you could choose the next stage to pounce onto someone for a response. And so when you listen to their response, so what's in the box? I'm going to ask, say, Abby. Then Abby would give her response. But as a teacher, I don't say, oh, well done, Abby, that's great, and stop it there. And I also I'm not going to be judgmental. I say, that's a really great idea. And what happens next is we've had Abby's response. That was because I pounced on Abby for a response, but I'm going to bounce her question now, her response, over to Rosie. So I'll say, right, Rosie, do you agree with Abby? Yes or no? Why or why not? So they're having to think about justifying their reasoning and clarifying their thinking. But it doesn't need to stop there, because to promote engagement, you can then ask the last person who's responded to choose another person to ask for their opinion and their response. And if time is running out, you can say, have you got anything to add that we haven't heard before? So it gives them a sense of autonomy. They feel in control. They might choose their best friend after themselves. They might choose the person with the most interesting hat that is not a hat, because they just want to have that interaction with them. So you can bounce the question around, but of course the important thing is that you need to draw it together and summarize the points before, and also pick up on misconceptions. So the pose is a question, the pause is the thinking time, the pounce is the first person you select, the bounce is the person that the first person selects, and then it goes around the room, so it's a shared experience and everyone is bringing their own ideas. But of course, you've got to have the answer, what's in the box? So you've got some ideas, and then you have the drum roll moment, and you say, what is in the box, beginning with J? And this is a box from my travels, I think, from maybe Indonesia. So opening the box, moment of truth, the big reveal, we have a jewel, a shiny jewel. So that could then be used in breakout rooms with the items that the learners have brought and the objects that you provide or they've got with them as a basis for storytelling, or for them to justify why their hat is not a hat, but why they chose it, to encourage greater vocabulary and sharing. So it's just simple ways of engaging them simply, but quickly and effectively, to keep their concentration span active so they don't drift off and want to go and play with their pet or their little brother or sister. The other thing about this is you can draw someone in. if you suspect and think someone is not participating, open up the question and say, James, if you were the teacher, what would you ask next? And then it draws them in and they feel as if they have control. So although you are directing the session and the questions, you can adapt it around their responses, which is what good teachers do anyway. So I hope this gives you a little bit of insight, and I hope some of you are very familiar with it, and I hope that it's given you some more ideas to think about and take away. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Judith, for that, and thank you to delegates for have been following the chat here. Joel guessed jelly bean, and so unfortunately he was wrong there. But we've had some really good comments picking up as you've gone through your session with things that the delegates have been trying, things that have been successful, and interpreting and building on some of your ideas there. So thank you very much for that. Okay, great. So I'd like to now introduce our third speaker, Dr. Swati Batra, joining us from India for this session. Dr. Swati also has over 30 years experience in education and focused on early childhood education. She's president of the Early Childhood Association in India and Association for Primary Education and Research. She's designed early years curricula that are used in India and the UAE, and trained many teachers in many countries. So I'm delighted to introduce her now for her tips. Thanks. Over to you, Dr. Swati.
Thank you, Abigail, for that lovely introduction. And namaste and hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's a small world indeed. It's a pleasure to be part of the Cambridge conference, and my topic for today is student-teacher engagement. I have made an acronym for it, which is called SNAC. Because when we talk about remote learning, it's important to understand that the duration or the intensity of the learning that we do remotely needs to be like a snack and not like a full meal, because it tends to tire children quite easily, and hence the acronym. Let me take you through the acronym now, and let me go to the next slide. Yes, S stands for SAY. Neuroscience has proven now that the human brain is social. We love to talk. Even when we are given gadgets to type, we chat with each other. So it's very important to keep remote learning engagement conversational, because if the teacher is only going to talk and there are no opportunities for the children to share or converse both with the teacher and with each other, then attention span will diminish. It's also important for teachers to understand that there are two separate areas in the brain for listening and for speaking. So you have the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area. So it's important when we talk about whole brain engagement that we give children ample opportunities to speak during the entire session. And this can be done beautifully with discussion starters. So if you have a small topic, you start the discussion and everybody joins in. This will keep children engaged and interactive throughout the session. N stands for notice. It's extremely important to remember Loris Malaguzzi's words that children have 100 languages. This is something that you will see a lot in the Reggio schools in Italy, and that children have 100 languages. And facial expression and body language is something that we teachers need to become sensitive to, especially during remote learning, because you can make out when a child is losing interest or is getting exhausted or frustrated because the child is unable to answer or able to understand something. So it's important for the teacher to immediately change her teaching style, and maybe have a brain break, etc. So it's important to notice these little signs that children show us during the remote learning session. It's also important when we talk about SNAC, the next letter is A. And A stands for ownership of learning. We all have a part of the brain that's called the thinking brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, which is the only difference between us and the animals. So this part of the brain loves and thrives on choices. So the more choices you give children, the more they will be engaged in your learning. Especially if you're giving home assignments, it's important that you give them the choice of 2 assignments, and they can choose which one they would like to do. So based on their learning style, they will be able to choose. Choices are again important during the virtual learning session also, because the more choices you will give children, the more they will be able to engage during remote learning and stay attentive. That's very, very important. C stands, of course, for being creative. Did a session by a teacher, and she was doing spellings, and she was doing short 4-letter word spellings of unusual words. And what she did was she put yellow stickies with each letter all over her face. And the children, as they spell it correctly, she would remove the sticky. So the whole game idea was that her face has to be visible by the end of it. So it's very, very important to get creative, especially where virtual remote-based learning is concerned, because it becomes quite boring for children to just keep staring at a screen. Even if you are talking or showing them visuals, it's important to think of interactive activities that would engage them further and keep their engagement throughout the session. K, of course, stands for kinesthetic, and sadly, in remote learning, it's constantly sitting and looking at a screen, so we are not using the different parts of our body, and that is where teachers need to get a little creative, that throughout the session, how can I make the children move around? One of the examples was also given at the beginning of the session, that you can make them go and get something. But it's also important that primary and lower secondary children love to have challenges. So, for example, if you're doing a poetry reading, etc., you can ask them to stand on 1 foot and do it. So this also involves multitasking and cognitive flexibility. So it makes them giggle and have fun. So it calms the brain. So it's fun to involve the body also in your remote learning class, because otherwise fatigue tends to get in when only the brain is constantly being used throughout the session. So I hope these ideas, these 5 ideas of mindfulness, help you in your student-teacher engagement. Especially, it's easy to remember because I have termed it as snack. So have fun, try it out, and do stay connected and do stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Swati. Thank you for sharing snack with us and going through those points. Again, we've had some comments on the chat and people keen to use that and try that out. So it's been great to hear from Rosie and Judith and Dr. Swati with their ideas. What we also wanted to do in this session was to give you the opportunities to share your experiences with each other. So we'd like to invite you to contribute and share your practical tips for things that have worked really well, that you've tried out, that you've evolved during times when you've been using remote or blended learning. So we've set up a link for you to do this. It's on the slide now, and there's also a link in the chat. If you open that, you should be able to click on the plus symbol that you see bottom right, and that will allow you to type in your ideas. We may not be able to go through and comment on everybody's in the session today. The idea is that you will have those to take away and have a look at the end of the session. So a really nice opportunity to share, but also for us to to benefit from everybody's experience and contribution. So I am going to give you a little bit of time, a few minutes now to do that, and we'll be able to see everybody's ideas as they are added to the Padlet. So it's over to you, and I look forward to seeing the ideas that you share. Just going to give you another, we've got the slide filling up with ideas. Using the link above you in the chat, we've asked delegates to share their ideas about practical tips for remote or blended learning, and that's what people are working on at the moment. So we're just watching those come on screen. So thank you very much for a wealth of ideas and contributions. We've got a real range, which is great, and I think it just shows the variety of things that can help. So a few people have mentioned breakout rooms for help with participation and engagement. That's been mentioned by a few people. Google Slides have been mentioned to promote collaboration. And quite a few tips as well that have worked for people in terms of using students' names and giving specific learning objectives. So yeah, I can see lots of really really interesting and useful practical tips for people to use. As we said, we will share this with you afterwards. Don't worry if you haven't had a chance to read through everything or see everything that's been added there. You'll get access to all of those after the session. But thank you very much for contributing. That's great. I've definitely picked up some new ideas there. Okay, so we're going to move into our Q&A, which is the last part of the session today. I know that we were asked a couple of questions earlier on. I'm just scrolling up to make sure that I get to those. But please feel free now to add your questions. They can be about anything that's been raised in the by the speakers today, or anything else that you want to ask on this topic. Okay, so I'm scrolling right up. So I think the first question that came in earlier was from Aisha, asking what are the resources that could be used for social interaction? So I'm going to ask Dr. Swati first of all. Do you have any suggestions for resources to be used for social interaction?
So what has worked best for us is we have a kind of a play date with 5 children at a time, and it helps them talk to each other without any interference or without any structured agenda. We do this first with children who know each other, and then we one by one we start putting in those 5 children a child who is not used to that group. So by the end of it, all the 5 are those that were not friends earlier, but have now, as part of this social grouping, have started learning a lot about each other and talking to each other. Sometimes with very shy children, you need to reduce the number from 5 to 3. But this has worked wonders for us, especially because social development is going quite for a toss during remote learning. And so we have to keep our finger always on socio-emotional development.
Thank you very much. Thanks for sharing that. Yes. And that sounds like a great way to promote that. I think Aisha's got another question there, which I think is in relation to Judith's tips. So she said, reducing text means instead of being concerned about the syllabus, we can go with the concepts, right? So I think Judith, you'd mentioned about reducing text on your presentations. Do you want to respond to that one?
Yes, I'm here. I think reducing text for me is about actually being able to cover some concepts better in more depth by breaking them down into manageable chunks so that you can take little bites at them, like the snack effect, to not face them and overwhelm them with a massive concept. The syllabus is still important, but it's about giving them little and often to keep them motivated and invited in, and that sense of belonging. If they can bring an object or show something. When I started doing online teaching with primary children, it was awful because we had the full screen with everybody's video and they all were saying, here's my teddy bear and it's my birthday and look at my new shoes or my new bracelet. And it took forever because they were not used to seeing each other. And we still need to make that social connection. So when I said at the beginning of my presentation, make a good environment for them to collaborate and to feel welcomed, if that's what it takes, then do it, because the benefits are they will join in, they will participate, and they will grow in confidence as you do that kind of thing. So the syllabus is still important, but it's how you present or represent the concepts in probably a shorter, sharp bites. That would be my best advice.
Great, thank you very much, Judith. That's really helpful. A question that's come in from Amira, I think, as we are focusing on online learning, is there any chance that Cambridge will be providing online assessment? Well, yes, so certainly Cambridge is thinking about what it means to provide really good online assessments in the future. And you know, that's of course the events that have happened over the last year have really accelerated the number of people who are teaching and learning online, and so thinking about online assessments is something that we are engaging with. At the same time, we need to make sure that whatever we do in terms of online assessments is right up there with the excellence and the standards that we have for our paper-based assessments. So there's lots of work to do in this area, lots of research and lots of development to make sure that anything that happens in the future with online assessments, we get it right for everybody. So certainly I'm sure you'll be hearing more from that. I can't give you any dates or times at the moment, but I think we will see this in the future, yes. So I think, Rosie, is that your answer you've posted for Joel's question? So Joel has said, I have a daughter doing online school with earphones and laptop cable. Being physical can be hazardous. She can trip or tangle and bring the laptop to the floor, or she might trip herself. Any advice? So Rosie, is that one you've picked up on in the chat?
Yeah, so I just said it's really important that we plan for off-screen time as well, and those physical activities are a really good opportunity to use that off-screen time, not only for the learners but for yourselves as well. I don't know about you, but staring at a screen all day long makes me feel extremely tired, and my concentration lags. So, you know, getting up and doing something physical and scheduling time for ourselves and for learners to do that is so important. And actually that kind of helps me to answer another question that's come through about the ideal duration of a single online learning period for primary students. Dr. Swati mentioned that children typically have a concentration span of no longer than 7 minutes at a time. And I'm not suggesting that you should have a series of 7-minute long lessons and then be tuning out and back in again. But, you know, it might be a useful opportunity at that 7-minute point to kind of take a look at your learners and see whether you've lost them. And if you have, encourage them to go and do something and then come back to the laptop. You know, you're still there waiting, and then they can have that brain break and that physical movement, even if it's just to go and get a glass of water or go and find their favorite toy or a snack or something like that. So I'd just be mindful of planning the duration of your teaching sessions face to face on the basis of that level of concentration. And of course, we can think about pre-recording videos, so learners can pause you, and they have control of when they're getting bored or need a break and need to do something active. So yeah, that they would be my responses to those two questions.
Thanks very much, Rosie. Thanks for picking up on both of those. I'm going to just dart around a little bit because Dr. Swati suggested on the chat about group puppet presentations also work for online group sessions instead of breakout rooms. You've had 3 people asking for a bit more information on that. Can you tell us a little bit more, Dr. Swati?
Yes. So here in puppet presentations, you put about 5 to maximum 7 children together, again as a group, and you give them a song or a story to choose, and then they create their own puppets. Now it's up to them how they want to create their puppets. You give them a little scaffolding by showing them stick puppets or hand puppets, etc. And a little mentoring from the parent or the teacher is also there about where to get the cutouts from, etc. But then they discuss with each other who's going to hold which puppet, who's going to say which dialogue, and then they invite a few people to their particular presentation, and that's how they cultivate offline group discussions and online group collaboration. So puppet presentations have helped us both for primary and for secondary children. In fact, I did the poem Lochinvar with 8th standard children as a puppet presentation online. So I think it works very well. Try it, and you can use whatever puppets are indigenous to your country. Like Indonesia has different puppets, India has different puppets. So art also gets involved, and art has a unique impact on the brain. So it's something worth trying.
Great, thank you very much. That's really, really interesting to hear about. I'm going to try and get through 2 or 3 more questions before we finish. We've got about 5 minutes left. Hendra asks about keeping students engaged with when you've got bigger class sizes and how difficult it is to monitor student engagement with bigger class sizes. Any tips on that? Who would like to pick up on that one?
I'll step in here if you want to, Abby. Can I step in?
Yes, great, thanks.
It is always the difficulty with the bigger classes because your eyes and ears need to be everywhere. If you are used to using breakout rooms, that's a good time to do that, because you can't have virtual eye contact with everybody. So sometimes it's good to have simple rules that at the beginning of the session, you all switch on your cameras to say hello virtually, and then for the rest of the session, unless they are answering a question, then cameras are off. But then have rules about having cameras on in breakout rooms, so they have small group discussions, and you can visit the breakout rooms and spend as much or as little time as you need to with them, which also gives them a sense of more teacher interaction, because you're not always addressing the whole group all the time. So having some paired discussions where they're offline and then breakout rooms in small groups and bringing it together as a whole class can help to manage the fact that you're not having a huge class for all of the time that you're online. But of course, it depends on the age of your students and their interest in the subjects that you're teaching them at the moment.
Yeah, great, thank you. And a follow-up to that one from Jean, how to manage a student who's always off camera and not responding when being called, any effective way to motivate to increase participation? Rosie, have you got any thoughts on that one?
So I don't have a magic wand and I don't know how to fix this, and this is something that came up in this morning session as well. I think it's sensible to understand why the student is so reluctant to be on camera or to participate. Is it that they're nervous about making a mistake? Is it that maybe in their home learning environment they wouldn't want other learners to see what's around them? Perhaps they don't feel they've got something valuable to contribute and they just would rather keep quiet. And I think once we can understand that the source of that anxiety or what's preventing them from participating, we can start to have a conversation with them about, well, what would work for you? How could I get you to participate? And it might be something as simple as giving them time to think about responses. I think about my own participation in this, and we're very much being posed a question and having to think on our feet. And learners would find that quite anxiety inducing, I would think. So, if it's feasible to do so, are there other ways they could communicate their answers and participate, like the Padlet that we used earlier, for example? Just a few suggestions, and you have to ask yourself, why do you need them to be verbal or be on camera? If it is an activity assessing their listening and speaking, then of course it's very important. But if it's more about communicating an idea, can they do that in text or in some other way? So just an opportunity for you to get a bit creative in how you respond to them as well.
Okay, I think Judith wanted to come in here as well.
Yeah, I just want to jump back in. I agree with what Rosie said. It could be a confidence thing. It could be they're embarrassed about their background at home. There are too many distractions. But actually, I've just taken notes during this session, and I've stolen an idea because I think it was on the Padlet wall. I've seen this, but I didn't write down who's contributed it. But someone said, what about shy students? Get them to wear a mask and then do some kind of role play so they can appear as, I don't know, their favourite superhero book character. So they're not actually appearing as themselves. That might give them more confidence. I haven't tried it, but it's something I'm stealing from the Padlet this afternoon. So whoever put that on there, thank you very much. I'm definitely going to have a go at that because it is a tricky one. And I think we haven't got total answers for everything, but all of these strategies will help. It's just good going forward to know this together, and we can work this out together. So that's really good. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Judith.
Abby, sorry, I've just got one more thought on that. I was thinking back in my classroom, I would often use silent debates, and that was really handy because then those really rambunctious students who have a lot to say can often demand the attention and have the limelight. And then there might be learners who feel a little more reluctant, who aren't participating, but they want to. So it might be useful to somehow translate a silent debate onto an online context. Again, an opportunity for creative thinking there.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. I'm sorry if we didn't quite get to your question, but I hope that you have found the Q&A session helpful, as well as the rest of our workshop today. I've definitely picked up from some great tips from our speakers, but also from yourselves. So thank you very much for joining us. Thanks to the events team for organising everything for us. Thank you to our speakers again, Rosie, Judith and Dr. Swati, and thank you for joining us from so many different locations. I wish you all a very good rest of your day or afternoon or evening, and look forward to connecting with you again soon. So thank you very much and goodbye.